I study local government and policy, and one of my main areas of research is representation. Who holds office? Who gets represented in local politics and government? And what difference does it make? I study representation in the context of underrepresented groups, African Americans and Latinos. And although social scientists have long been interested in questions of representation for these groups, most research has focused on federal and state offices, which constitute less than 1% of all public offices in the US. So even if we study them a lot, we'll continue to know only a little. Indeed, there are some 89,000 local governments in the US and more than 500,000 local elected officials. In fact, for a nation that prides itself on limited government, we sure have a lot of governments. It turns out that studying these governments and the elected officials who serve in them is not easy. In part, this is because we have 50 systems of local government, one for each state. But the bigger challenge stems from the fact that the data on local elections are not centralized. Indeed, they have never been systematically compiled at any level of aggregation for any period of time. Given these constraints, my research on minority representation has relied mostly on roster data, the names and positions of African Americans and Latinos who hold elected offices. Yet these roster data have obvious limitations. For one, they tell us only about who occupies the office, ignoring the critical process that got them there in the first place, the election. In addition, roster data provide information only about the winners. But what about the losers? In fact, this question is one that I've been thinking about for nearly 2 decades. Do we fail to observe Latinos and African Americans in office because they failed to win elections? Or is it due to the fact that they were not running in the first place? To empirically investigate this question would require data on the elections and candidates themselves. About 15 years ago, I started trying to collect these data, and this initial effort entailed lots and lots of research assistance. When I came to Rice in 2003, I made friends with an accomplished software developer, Simon Lugg, and I complained to him about this problem frequently. I would say, I wish there was a way to grab election results from hundreds or even thousands of websites, normalize them, store them in a database, and ultimately automate the process. He was intrigued by the problem, and after several years of talking and imagining, he started sketching it out, and I started writing it up. In 2010, we received funding from NSF, and at the time I was elated. For the next 3 years, we worked hard to build a suite of software application tools that would systematically collect, digitize, and disseminate local elections data. The Local Elections in America project, or LEAP as we call it, now has longitudinal data for thousands of jurisdictions and hundreds of thousands of electoral contests. It worked. For me, this means I'll finally be able to answer the question that has long eluded me. For others, it means unparalleled opportunities to learn about and analyze local elections. It turns out, however, that building the infrastructure to collect the local elections data may not have been the hard part. Instead, the hard part seems to be sustainability. Sustainability was not something I had thought much about. Now it keeps me awake at night. For me, sustainability has meant thinking in a whole new way about clients and customers and value propositions, marketing and pricing plans, startup versus nonprofit versus operating in a university environment. It's not a comfortable place for someone who prefers to think like a social scientist. And I wish I had an easy solution to share and a happy ending for my story about sustainability, the challenges of sustainability, but I don't, at least not yet. But the last few years have made me think about even bigger questions, about the work of social scientists. How and why we do our research, what kind of progress we're making, what impact we're having. In the past decade, the amount of election data available online has increased exponentially, and this is true for lots of other kind of data as well. Indeed, the internet is now home to a wealth of data about human activity, much of which is actually extraordinarily useful for social scientists. But accessing these data, connecting them, managing them, as I have found, requires different models of data collection, new tools, more resources, and different incentives. Data collection is and should remain a means to an end, not the end itself. But today, the rewards for this activity are too small and the costs too high. So in conclusion, I wish for a world where social scientists have access to high-quality data, so we can make even more significant and timely contributions to understanding human behavior and the world around us. But I also hope that making this happen does not require that we stop thinking like social scientists. Thank you.